For those of you that are on, we'll be starting in a few minutes. So just hang in. We'll a couple minutes before 6 o'clock. Thank you. Okay, good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me all right? Hope so.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. If you have any problems with audio during the presentation, please raise your hand. We'll be using the chat function during the presentation today. So you can use the raise your hand function. I have individuals monitoring the meeting, so we'll be able to go through the information and make sure that any problems are getting addressed or being heard. I'd like to welcome everybody to the public information session for the Clean Earth of Carteret LLC. It's a pre-construction air permit application meeting related to their Class B recycling center. My name is Michael Logan. I'm the Vice President of Environmental Services for our Compliance Plus Services. We provide consulting and permitting engineering for the Clean Earth of Carteret facility and have prepared the application and the technical information that's provided therein. So tonight's session is part of an enhanced public outreach that's being done pursuant to requirements under the environmental justice law, which we'll talk about a bit during our presentation tonight. We're trying to ensure that any interested parties, the people in the communities that where the facilities are located, are fully aware of any changes that are taking place at the facilities, certain facilities that are operating, to ensure that they understand what potential impacts that could have on the environmental or any public health stressors. Again, we're going to be going through this presentation tonight for it's just relatively brief, 20-25 minutes of an overview of the project, our permit, the operations at the facility, and some details related to the potential impacts of the operations on the community. And if at any time there's questions that come up, again, you can use the raise your hand function in the chat feature in the Zoom presentation. Alternatively, we will be stopping at the end of the presentation. Can answer any questions at that time. If people have particular comments on the application itself, there's information that we'll be going through to ensure that there's anything, there's information can be provided into us. This all becomes part of the public record for the final permit application and goes to the Department of Environmental Protection for review and consideration as part of the permitting process. Okay. I think that's about it. Again, we're recording this as a public hearing, part of the requirements. So all the information that we're providing here is being recorded. Will also be presented. We'll post this up on our website location where we have provided the information previously for this meeting, as well as the public announcements that have been related to the application during this process. So we'll get started. Sean, you want to go to the next slide? Okay. It's a brief project summary overview of the application itself. The Clean Earth of Carteret facility is a Class B recycling center. It's fully permitted and authorized by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, NJDEP, to receive, store, process, treat, and transfer certain source separated recyclable materials that have been identified by the NJDEP as suitable for recycling recovery to produce various products that can be returned to the economic mainstream. The Class B materials that are received at the CEC facility include petroleum hydrocarbon contaminated soil, which we'll call PHC soils throughout this presentation, as well as various aggregates, such as brick, block, concrete, stone, rock, and asphalt. Next slide, please. The facility has, as its primary area, a process building that has prepared for soil treatment, where various soils that have petroleum hydrocarbon contaminants are processed to reduce their constituent concentrations and allow them to be recovered for reuse. We also do aggregates, crushing, resizing, and sorting that are conducted in the exterior areas of the plant, as well as screening of soils for reuse into various development of products that are used for redevelopment, as well as construction materials. Next slide. So during the recycling of the Class B materials, Clean Earth of Carteret utilizes various equipment to process, handle the soil and aggregate materials managed at its site. This equipment and the recycling activities conducted at the facility are currently operating under several individual air permits that were issued to regulate on-site emissions. CEP has applied for a new pre-construction permit from NJDEP that will allow the facility to, one, conduct and consolidate its existing air permits into a single air pollution control permit that covers the operations both conducted inside the facility's existing processing building, as well as outdoor operations conducted in the facility's designated storage and processing areas of its Class B recycling center. In addition, CEC is also seeking the ability to receive, process, store, and or transfer certain soils with low levels of petroleum hydrocarbons, contaminants that in the facility's outdoor processing areas that do not require biological treatment or biotreatment, bioremediation to reduce contaminants prior to reuse. These materials can be reused directly and frequently only require some screening outdoors to prepare it as a material that can be suitably returned to the marketplace. Next slide, please. So again, the crux of our presentation today is to enact provisions that were passed under the state of New Jersey's recently issued environmental justice law. The law was introduced to new requirements to evaluate environmental and public health impacts of certain facilities in overburdened communities. While the regulations were being developed to implement the EJ law requirements, NJDEP's commissioner issued an administrative order 2021-25 or AO25 that imposed certain provisions of the environmental justice law while the new regulations were being developed for existing permit applications for some designated facilities under the law. This particular application is subject to the AO25 requirements. The application's been under review for a couple of years with the department. So under the AO25, certain facilities seeking these permits that could result in adverse impacts to overburdened communities are subject to enhanced public participation requirements, such as public outreach and an extended opportunity for comments. Next slide. So as part of the expanded public participation process under the AO25, Clean Earth of Carteret published a public notice in two local papers, one in English and one in Spanish, that indicated that a 60-day public comment period began on July 1st, where the community can submit written comments on the activities proposed in CEC's pre-construction permit application that are under review by the department. The notice also provided a website location where a full copy of the application and other relevant information was available for review. The notice subsequently also announced that there would be a public information session held to provide an opportunity for the community to hear information on the proposed pre-construction permit application, which is tonight's meeting. Next slide, please. So any written comments on the application, which is still extending out for another 30 days, or the proposed activities that we are included in thereunder, can be directed to Clean Earth of Carteret, Glare Compliance Plus Services at 240 Gibraltar Road, Suite 100, Horsham, Pennsylvania 19044. We can also accept comments electronically via email at the email address indicated on the slide presentation here. And during today's information session, you'll also be provided the opportunity to ask questions on the project or provide verbal comments that can be included as part of the application record. Any questions from anyone? Okay. dig into the technical details of the process. Next slide, please. So the Clean Earth of Carteret's existing Class B recycling center is located at 24 Middlesex Avenue on block 102, lot 6 in the borough of Carteret, Middlesex County, New Jersey. The CEC facility is surrounded by industrial uses, including several warehousing storage facilities that are currently operating. The facility is located more than a quarter mile from the nearest residential home in this industrial area. Next slide. We depicted here a picture of the operating facility, the landward areas. So the CEC has been operating at this location since October 1998. Began as a soil processing operation to handle petroleum contaminated soils. Since it's commencing its operation, CEC has effectively recovered millions of tons of impacted soils that have been returned to the marketplace for beneficial use, while avoiding the use of quickly diminishing landfill disposal space for these materials. The existing 23.37 acre site, which part of it is inside of the Arthur Kill River that's adjacent to the facility. And with the landward portions that are actually part of the operations are approximately 13.5 acres, 13.44 acres. It's a former brownfield site property that was partially remediated and redeveloped utilizing recycled aggregate products produced at CEC's Class B Recycling Center. Next slide, please. So CEC is currently permitted to accept up to a total of 4,700 tons a day of either petroleum contaminated soils, petroleum hydrocarbon contaminated soils, and or aggregate materials for recycling. It has also a capacity of a weekly average of 28,000 tons per week. The CEC Class B recycling facility principally receives and biologically treats petroleum hydrocarbon contaminated soil to remove and reduce the hydrocarbon contaminants to make the soil suitable for reuse at various end market sites as construction or fill products. The biotreatment of soil is performed inside the facility's process building, as shown in the yellow shaded section below. Treated and processed soils are also stockpiled just outside of the building to the rear and prior to shipment off-site for beneficial use. Next slide. CEC also receives and stores, processes, transfers various aggregate materials, including brick, block, concrete, stone, rock, and asphalt from a variety of sources in the portions of the site highlighted below in purple. These are operated exterior to the building and are outdoor processing areas that we'll talk about during the presentation of the application. The aggregate materials accepted by CEC are screened, sorted, resized, and crusher to produce construction materials and structural fill products that are returned to the marketplace. Next slide, please. So just a bit about the biotreatment process, which is part of the permit application insofar as it's being rolled into the combined, the combination of the existing permits into one overall facility permit application. So the CEC was actually the first fixed space bioremediation facility permitted in the state of New Jersey. and at the time was the largest of its design in the United States. The PHC soils accepted for treatment at the facility include soils contaminated with oils, gasoline, kerosene, jet fuel, number 1 through 6 fuel oils, manufactured gas plant residues, used oils, and waste oil. The biotreatment process consists of the placement of the PHC soils into the facility's process building, where there the soil is prepared and stockpiled used by screening to homogenize the materials. CEC then applies a mixture of naturally occurring microorganisms and a nutrient blend of fertilizer, which are mixed into the soil matrix. Next slide, please. The microorganism initially feed on the supplied fertilizer until it is exhausted, at which point the organisms begin to naturally digest and break down the petroleum compounds as nutrients or food. The soil stockpiles remain in the building and are periodically turned to maintain sufficient oxygen levels in the matrix to support the microbial digestion process. The process is monitored by CEC and continues until the contaminant levels in the soil reach the specified end use requirements. Following the treatment, then the soils can be removed and placed outside in the facility's stockpile storage area to the rear of the building. Next slide, please. CEC's process building is a fully enclosed 80,000 square foot structure that contains a concrete floor and open framed steel structure. It has segregated bays for batch processing and tracking to ensure that we understand exactly what the soils are that are coming in. They can make the matrix meet the specific end use requirements based on various characteristics of the soil material itself, as well as the contaminant levels that are experienced in either of the soils. The use of air curtains on the building's vehicle entry-exit doors ensure that emissions from the storage and processing PHC soils are vented and controlled by the building's air pollution control system. Depicted below, the soils are run through the building, so they have a main storage area and receiving for unloading materials. Then they're eventually moved through the building in a more or less a circular process to allow us to treat the soils, add the nutrient mixtures, and then once the soils are meet and tested to meet a end use requirement, it can be moved to its outdoor storage area. Next slide, please. The process building's air pollution control system consists of a bag house and carbon absorption units and air curtains. The air pollution control's bag house removes a minimum of 99% of particulate matter and non-organic hazardous air pollutants emissions from the building's exhaust air. There's actually 2 carbon absorption units in the air pollution control system that are designed to remove a minimum of 95% of the volatile organic compounds and any organic hazardous air pollutant emissions from the building's air. These units are set up in series so that the air goes through one unit to conduct a primary absorption and cleaning, and then a secondary absorber is placed into that where the airflow is again treated prior to discharge through an open stack. The air curtains that operate at the door openings control the dust and emissions from leaving the building so that everything is contained within the unit. Next slide, please. Again, as we had indicated above, first proposed change that is included in the air permit modification application is to consolidate the facility's existing air permits into a single air pollution control permit that covers the operation conducted both inside the facility's process building through the biological treatment process and air pollution control system, as well as the outdoor operations conducted in the facility's designated storage and processing areas of the Class B Recycling Center. A single permit will provide efficient administrative control of the facility's recycling operations and also enhances compliance with the various operating conditions required under the permit. The consolidation of the air permits is largely an administrative change, initially prompted through both discussions with the New Jersey DEP as well as Clean Earth of Carteret. And the changes do not change any result in any increase in the daily or annual throughput capacity of the recyclable materials that are handled at the facility. Results in no increase in truck traffic at the site. Results in no new types of materials being processed at the facility. And there's no new material storage areas or no new types of emissions that'll be generated at the site. Everything's essentially going to remain as is under the existing permits, just administratively handled in a more efficient manner. Clean Earth Carteret's also proposing to make minor adjustments in the operating hours of some of the process equipment outside of the facility. That's in order to remove prior inconsistencies. As each individual existing permit was issued, there were various operating requirements so that the operating hours weren't not consistent throughout. We actually result in a reduction in the overall operating hours of the plant equipment and engines for the overall operations that are conducted outside of the process building. There's no specific changes that are proposed in for the existing process building for the biological treatment process. Next slide, please. The second change CEC addresses in the application is adding the ability to receive, store, process, or transfer certain soils with low levels of petroleum hydrocarbon contaminants in the facility's outdoor processing areas. It's principally related to screening those soils outside. These low-level PHC soils do not require biological treatment prior to beneficial use, i.e. the petroleum hydrocarbon contaminants in the soil do not require further reduction. The low-level contaminants that are identified as in these soils would be those that would be below 9,500 parts per million by weight of total petroleum hydrocarbon contaminants. CEC has also proposed in the application to limit the soil petroleum hydrocarbon contaminants to no more than a total of 50 parts per million by weight of volatile or gasoline-related compounds. Example, these are BTEX compounds or benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene, the principal constituents in gasoline products. By comparison, in New Jersey's current residential soil remediation standards for extractable petroleum hydrocarbons is 5,300 parts per million, based on an ingestion dermal exposure pathway. Moreover, the New Jersey non-residential soil remediation standards for EPH is 75,000 parts per million, required based on the ingestion dermal exposure pathway. So one of the key elements that we kind of highlight here is that the measurement of total petroleum hydrocarbons for air contaminant requirements is a slightly different measure than the environmental extractable hydrocarbons. Environmental extractable hydrocarbons are those that get released from the material or the soil into the environment, or can be released into the environment as a result of leaching from exposure to rainwater and other moisture that could enter the soil if left in the environment. So actually the amount of extractable hydrocarbons is less than the total petroleum hydrocarbons that would be actually measured in the soil itself. So that while these are not exactly a linear relationship or exactly equivalent, it does give you an impression that if 95 parts per million of the total petroleum hydrocarbons as a number to compare it to the leachable extractable portions of 5,300 is a measure that would be moderately higher. Next slide. It's based on the proposed outdoor operations of processing the petroleum hydrocarbon contaminated soils, low-level hydrocarbon contaminated soils. There are expected to be minor increases in certain pollutant emissions, as we indicated here. So for volatile organic compounds, and this would be at maximum throughput and use basis, we would expect an increase of a maximum of 5.48 tons per year in volatile organic hydrocarbons. Again, these would be primarily related to solely the BTEX compounds or gasoline-related compounds that would volatilize. Total metal hazardous air pollutants potential is 0.0058 tons per year, less than 10 pounds. And polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons or PAHs is less than 0.0004 tons per year in emissions. Based on risk modeling that has been done as part of the air permit application, which we'll explain later, these increases are not expected to result in any significant adverse impact to environmental or public health stressors for the surrounding community. The actual Carteret stressor block group value does currently exceed 4 of the geographic point of comparison mean values for New Jersey identified air pollution, environmental public health stressors for ground level ozone, cancer risk from diesel particulate matter, cancer risk from air toxics, excluding the diesel particulate matter, and then also non-cancer risk from air toxics in the area. This is based on the New Jersey's environmental justice information that's been gathered for this particular area to demonstrate of which areas have been above a 50% value of impact from these particular levels of higher stress to the existing community. So based on this, we've looked at each one of these potential areas as what these impacts of the proposed operations may have on these public health stressors that have already been identified in the Carteret stressor block group. Next slide, please. So again, an evaluation was conducted of potential impacts for the proposed permit changes from their effect on these stressor concerns. For ground level ozone, it's on a 3-year average above the standard. Potential increases in ground level ozone have been minimized through operational restrictions that are already in the application, including the removal of 1 pieces of the equipment in operation, as well as we've reduced the overall operating hours of the equipment that's going to be operating at the facility. So we also included in the application upgrades to newer, more efficient diesel engines that have been included in the application, which have lower ozone impact and precursor emissions. As a result, the net change in ground level ozone is not expected to result in significant degradation to the ozone quality in the area. It's not a known contributor. Cancer risk from diesel particulate matter. So again, the newer engines with greater efficiencies that actually, have resulted in decreases in diesel particulate matter emissions due to their updated controls and improved engine efficiencies that meet the most recent certified EPA engine emission standards. It's actually reduced, since we're still under the same permits. When we combine all these under one existing permit, we're actually reducing diesel particulate matter at the site. So the emissions here will also meet the New Jersey risk screening requirements, which we'll talk about in a minute. Next slide, please. We did review the air potential for cancer risk from air toxics, excluding diesel particulate matter, to look at potential for risk for increase in cancer. So again, based on proposed emissions subject to the New Jersey risk screening requirements, conducted a risk screen that shows that the expected risk is going to be less than 1 in a million for residential or sensitive receptor populations near or around this facility. So we're not increasing the cancer risk levels within this area that are going to expect to have significant impact on the community. Additionally, we did do a non-cancer risk screening for air toxics using an NJDEP's risk screening module. And these proposed emissions are going to be subject to that same standard. And again, we do not expect, we expect that the combined hazard quotient requirement established by NJDEP will be met through this air toxics emissions screening. That's actually still being finalized as part of the application process, but it will be adjusted as to ensure that these standards are met and consistent with what we're providing here. Next slide, please. Again, as part of the air permitting process, New Jersey DEP requires the first level risk screening for emissions from sources like the process building to evaluate the long-term and short-term risk for both cancerous and non-cancerous effects from hazardous air pollutants. Clean Earth of Carteret performed the first level screening, determined if the estimated emissions from the process building present any risk to the community. As it turns out, the process building emissions passed the first level of risk screening with an associated risk of less than 1 in a million for all hazardous air pollutants from the building. The enhanced risk screening required for the fugitive emissions from the outdoor screening of the low-level THC soils is required to meet is expected and required to meet the New Jersey DEP standards. So the fugitive emissions passed the enhanced risk screening with an associated risk level of less than 1 in a million for all of the HAP metals constituents that were present. So we had indicated above or previously that the enhanced risk screening is currently ongoing for VOC and HAP fugitive emissions. However, the application will be adjusted to ensure that this risk screening will also be less than 1 in a million. We're expecting that to pass once that's completed. Next slide, please. So that's in essence the whole of the application and the information they're providing here. As just a reminder, any written comments on the application or proposed activities can be directed as indicated on the screen. Comments can also be sent electronically. And again, if during the information session, if you have any questions, this would be the time to ask them. So we can add anyone that would like to have any questions, or if there's any comments related to the information that provided, or any questions on the application itself. Again, you can use the chat function to raise your hand. Okay. There's no specific questions. We're going to allow anybody to take down the information that's on here. Again, you can submit any questions or even comments directly through the email address that's indicated on the screen, or send us a written letter. There's sufficient time to get this information in, as we'll keep the comment period open throughout the remainder of August, or the start of August, the month of August. So any information can be provided during that time. All the information that we get in and any comments that we do have, we'll provide in responses. The people that are on this call here will be receive a copy of any direct comments that we respond to on the application. In addition, we'll post this on the website along with the other information that's provided for this application. That's it for the moment. I'm going to allow this information to stay up for a few minutes. We're going to allow the presentation to rerun another time through. This will allow additional time unless anyone else still wants to join the meeting. I've left the invite open for a bit, so I'm just going to allow that to just hold for the moment. Melissa, any comments or concerns? Sean, can you unmute there? Okay. John, you want to let the presentation just run by another time, just in case we have anybody coming on?
Sean's gonna rerun it in a second.
Thank you. Okay. As we've had no other individuals asking to join the meeting tonight, we are going to close out this information session. Again, if anyone has any specific comments or questions, they can direct them to the us either via email or in writing, as indicated on the screen. And we'll close out the meeting and close our public record at this time. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Have a good night.